Episode 1 of this series began with a piece of paper, a charter, London, the 31st of December, 1600. 200 odd merchants, a royal signature, and the words, sole and whole trade and traffic to all lands east of the Cape of Good Hope. A company. Just a company. 258 years later, another piece of paper, London, again, the 2nd of August, 1858. The Government of India Act. This one did not give a company an empire, it took the empire back. An empire built one document at a time, ended the same way. Maps, money, decisions. This is Tareekh Hisaab. By the summer of 1858, the verdict on the East India Company as a governing body was effectively in. Not from a court, the company had never been convicted of anything, as we saw in the Hastings trial. The verdict came from Parliament, and it was administrative. You have demonstrated that a corporation cannot govern a subcontinent in a crisis. The indictment was not moral, it was structural. A board of directors in Leadenhall Street, answering to shareholders, had been making the ultimate decisions for a territory of 200 million people. The Regulating Act of 1773 had tried to fix this. Pitt's India Act of 1784 had tried harder. The Charter Acts of 1813 and 1833 had stripped the company's trading monopoly entirely, leaving it as a political administrator with a commercial name. By 1858, the company was, in commercial terms, already a ghost. It had not turned a trading profit for decades. What it retained was governance, and 1857 had demonstrated the governance was failing. The Government of India Act was passed on the 2nd of August, 1858. The company was dissolved. Its territory, its army, its debts, its revenues, and its obligations were transferred to the Crown. The Secretary of State for India replaced the Board of Control. A Council of India replaced the Court of Directors. The paperwork was, by now, very tidy. The transfer of power needed a public face. It got one on the 1st of November, 1858, when Lord Canning, the Governor-General, now redesignated Viceroy, read Queen Victoria's proclamation to an assembly of Indian princes, officials, and notables at Allahabad. The proclamation promised no further annexation of Indian states, respect for Indian religious customs, equal treatment under the law regardless of race or creed, employment in the civil service on the basis of merit, the rights of princes to adopt heirs, directly reversing Dalhousie's doctrine of lapse. The Crown had weighed the options after 1857, continue the company's expansionist, rationalizing approach and risk another rebellion, or offer legitimacy to the existing structures, princes, customs, hierarchies, in exchange for loyalty. The proclamation chose the second. What had caused the rebellion would be addressed. What would not change was who held the ultimate power. In practice, the proclamation's promises were honored unevenly. The equal treatment clause was tested constantly and failed consistently. The merit-based civil service had racially exclusive entrance examinations held in London. But as a statement of intent, as the founding document of the British Raj, it marked a genuine shift in tone, if not always in substance. Before we close the ledger on the company itself, run the final audit. On the asset side, the railways it had begun, the telegraph, the canals, the codification of law, the uniform currency, the postal system, English as a language of administration, and eventually elite education, with consequences still visible today. On the liability side, the systematic extraction of revenue that funded British industry while limiting Indian industrial development, the destruction of Indian textile industries through tariff policy in favor of Lancashire, the famines that revenue collection accelerated, the communal tensions that administrative categorization of India by religion, for census, for law, for army recruitment, hardened into political fault lines, and a debt, the company's wars and administration financed partly by Indian borrowing, with the interest paid from Indian revenue for decades after. This is not a ledger that balances. Both sides of it are real. Historians have been arguing about the net figure for over a century. What the ledger does show, unambiguously, is the direction of decision-making. The choices that mattered were made in Britain for reasons rooted in British interests, and the costs fell in India. The new Crown government had learned one lesson from 1857, very precisely. The Bengal Army, as constituted, was a liability. The ratio of British to Indian troops was immediately and permanently increased. Artillery, the arm that could turn an infantry rebellion into something far more dangerous, was henceforth reserved for British units only. The reorganization was structural, designed to prevent any single Indian regiment or region from holding the firepower to rebel effectively. The Indian Army would remain the instrument of British rule, and eventually of British imperial adventures from Africa to China to the First World War. It would also remain the institution within which many of the officers who would command independent India and Pakistan were trained. What replaced the company was not simply a different administration, it was a different idea of what British rule in India was for. The company had always been, at heart, an extraction mechanism. Even when it built roads and courts, it did so because order was good for business. Its ideology was commercial. The Raj operated under a different, and in some ways more dangerous, ideology, the civilizing mission. The idea that Britain was in India not primarily to profit from it, but to govern it on the Indians' behalf, until such time as Indians were ready to govern themselves. When that time would come was always conveniently insufficient. This ideology had two effects. It made the Raj harder to dislodge on moral grounds. It had a self-justification the company never bothered to construct. And it required the suppression of Indian political agency more thoroughly than the company had done. Because if Indians were governing themselves, the mission was complete and the British should leave. The logic of the civilizing mission was the permanent postponement of its own conclusion. The princes accepted subordination in exchange for security and status. The Indian middle class, educated in English, employed in the new administration, accepted the Raj's terms in exchange for careers and a route to eventually contesting them, and the peasant majority accepted, or rather endured, what they had always endured: taxation, distance from power, and the patience of those who have no other option. Return one last time to the beginning. December 1600. 200 merchants in London decide to pool their capital and send ships east. They have a charter from the Queen. They are not conquerors. They are traders with paperwork. What they found in India was a Mughal empire so vast, so wealthy, and so confident that it barely noticed them. For 100 years, the green dots on the coast were exactly what they appeared to be: customers. Then the Mughal center fractured, and the company, following incentives, always following incentives, moved from trade to lending, from lending to military alliance, from alliance to tax collection, from tax collection to governance. Each step was rational, each step was profitable, each step was, in its immediate context, a decision that made sense to the people who made it. And at the end of that chain of decisions, 200 million people were governed by a corporation, until the corporation broke under the weight of what it had become, and the state that had chartered it took over. The charter that started it all came from the Crown. The act that ended it went back to the Crown. Full circle, one document at a time. The company was gone. The British Raj would last until 1947. In those 90 years, the great famines, the rise of the Indian National Congress, partition, independence, the long argument conducted in English, Urdu, Hindi, Bengali, and a dozen other languages about what India and Pakistan were and should be. That argument did not begin in 1858. It had been building since 1600, since the moment a group of merchants showed up on the Mughal coast and were, politely, permitted to stay. The company is over. The account is not. Hisaab abhi baki hai. 12 episodes, 258 years. One question: how does a shop become an empire? Not by conquest alone, not by any single great man or great villain. It happens the way compound interest works, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. One charter leads to one warehouse, leads to one garrison, leads to one tax grant, leads to one annexed kingdom. And before anyone has made a single decision that seemed, in the moment, like the building of an empire, you have built one. The East India Company's story is, in the end, a system story. A story about what happens when incentives are left to run without constraint, and who pays when the bill comes due. The British Raj inherited that bill. Independent India and Pakistan inherited it after that. We are still, in many ways, counting. If you've been watching from the beginning, thank you. The ledger is yours now. And if you want to know what happened next, the Raj, the famines, the independence movement, and how it ended, well, we have been known to keep accounts. This has been Tareekh ka Hisaab.